So keep that in mind. So I wanted to talk today about cannabis and cardiac events because it keeps coming up. Every day, I feel like there's another headline where we've got individuals or new studies published on the topic. So I wanted to go over it. Again, if you are not a member of the group, you get to hear this live. Good for you. If you are a member of the group, we'll record this and it'll be on the website. If you do want to join our group, that's us. We do all sorts of stuff. You can help join a committee where we're trying to impact laws the way they're written, where the pharmacist's role plays, as well as other healthcare professionals. We do a lot of network opportunities. That's this. We'll have a chance to talk during this presentation. We do have a community forum set up on the site. We're doing virtual events. We're doing pharmacist in-person education and all sorts of fun stuff. So if you're interested in cannabis, and you're maybe a pharmacist or someone who's just interested in the California medical market, please reach out. This is what we're going to cover today. Quickly, we're just going to do a background of why I'm talking about this. We're going to talk about how THC works. We're going to talk about how marijuana interacts with the cardiovascular system and the endocannabinoid system. We're going to talk about potential risks. We're going to cover a few of the headlines, and then I'm going to give you a review. This is not meant to be comprehensive. In fact, it's quite the opposite. What this is meant to do is this is meant to get your brain moving, get you thinking about what the challenges are and what we're aiming to achieve, what the realities are on the ground versus what is maybe a little bit of media hype. So why are we talking about this? Well, I'd say the first reason, look at this, published today, 5 a.m. on February 28th. That is today. So we just had another article come and be published, very timely for our talk today. But it's not just CNN. The right talks about this too. We've got Fox News citing an increase in heart attacks. Look there, the headline says twice as likely to have a heart attack history. And that's concerning, especially in young adults. There's also this Pharmacy Times article. So even our own kind, for the pharmacists in the room, are indeed talking about these associations, these correlations, and then, publishing them, making a lot of media, let's say, excitement discussion, but they're not really telling you the whole story in their headlines. And I think that's one of the key takeaways at the end. So spoiler alert. Cannabis and cardiovascular events, these are some things to consider. So is this connection real? We continue to see these connections made in the news and in the media about whether cannabis could really affect our cardiovascular system and in a negative way, right? We always think of cannabis as positive, but we keep seeing these headlines. It's hard to discern what's happening. So things we need to consider before we can even, enter this frame of mind is what exposure level are we talking about? How often and how much cannabis are we consuming? And is that high THC cannabis? We need to think about, one of my favorite topics is the role of the endocannabinoid system in the cardiovascular system. What does the ECS do? What is its role? And how does THC in particular, if primarily found in a high THC cannabis or marijuana, how does it affect that system? Methods used, a lot of these studies are retrospective, which comes with its whole litany of problems. And there's a lot of biases associated with the type of method, retrospectively looking at surveys. There's something called recall bias, where individuals don't really remember how much or how often or what kind, what strain, so to speak. And I want to consider other cannabinoids. We talk about cannabis. Cannabis is bad. Cannabis is bad for the heart. Actually, the vast majority of the data suggests that THC is bad for the heart, which is the most prevalent cannabinoid in marijuana, but it is far from the only cannabinoid. There are hundreds identified.
Right.
And in cannabis itself, it's not uncommon for there to be other cannabinoids present, be it in minor or lower levels. And in other types of cannabis, there's no THC at all, and only other cannabinoids which may be protective. Also, I want to make a point when we're looking at these retrospective models, we need to think about who that person is. Associating cannabis use to outcomes is relatively easy, but understanding that individual's relationship with cannabis, what got them to the point of consuming every day, what their childhood, adverse event score might be, and so much more, what their other conditions that they're treating. There's just a lot to consider when we're trying to make these associations I would say, sort of frivolously. Now, what does THC do exactly? Well, technically, THC mimics a chemical that our body produces. You've probably heard of it, anandamide, the bliss molecule. Now, THC, even though if you look at it in the stick drawing at the top up here, it doesn't really look like anandamide. You can actually see that it does share this fatty tail that looks quite a lot like the molecule of anandamide. And because of some of these other structures, like this hydroxy group and this methyl group up at the top, we actually see a relatively similar pharmacology of these two molecules. So THC mimics anandamide in the body. Well, we think endocannabinoid's good, mimicking anandamide should be good, right? Well, I think it depends, and that's where we get into the nitty-gritty of this talk. So we do have this anandamide mimicking molecule, delta-9 THC, and it does have a preference for CB1 receptors versus CB2 receptors. Now, not to get you too far back in your ECS pathophysiology lecture, but CB1 receptors are what are responsible for the THC-induced high, or the bliss that you get from the bliss molecule in anandamide. This receptor is responsible for a lot of things. In fact, it's the most abundantly present receptor in the entire brain. However, it is in other tissues as well, including our lungs, our muscles, our livers, and of course, our heart and vascular tissue, which is the focus of today. Now, we do know that THC acutely affects blood pressure. Interestingly, it does different things in different species. It drastically drops mouse blood pressure. It sort of transiently or briefly drops human blood pressure. And it's not necessarily a drop. Chronic exposure may actually predispose us to an elevation in blood pressure. The jury is still out, and the results have been mixed. We do know pretty definitively that THC causes a tachycardic effect, so increasing chronotropy or heart rate. That is a pretty well-established side effect, and if you reflect on the next time you're feeling kind of stoned, you might find that you're experiencing this as well. It's also involved in the inflammatory response, as the whole endocannabinoid system is. THC is engaging with this system. It's certainly not the most potent anti-inflammatory we know, but it does look like acutely THC has the propensity to decrease inflammation. However, chronic exposure to THC may actually lead to an increase in baseline inflammation. This comes down to a difference in the activation from omega-3 fatty acids and omega-6, and I'm going to get into that in the next section. But this is sort of how THC works, by mimicking anandamide. If you put these two-dimensional pictures on top into three-dimensional space, you can see that they occupy a very similar geometric space, and that is actually what defines their pharmacology. So we need to then understand, if THC acts on the endocannabinoid system, what is the endocannabinoid system doing in the heart? So within the ECS, within the heart, there is a mini ECS. Each organ system pretty much has its own, let's call it software and hardware to run the endocannabinoid system. And the ECS plays an important role, not just in the heart tissues itself or the cardiac cells, but also in blood cells that pump through the heart, immune cells, which both are inside the heart and in the blood, fat cells, which are super important to the functioning of the heart, our vasculature cells. I believe I spelled that word wrong. I do apologize. And so, as well as our nervous cells, which helps drive the rate and rhythm of the heart. So mediating blood flow, aiding in electrical and altering electrical conductivity, dealing with inflammation. These are all roles of the ECS within your cardiac tissues. A lot of jobs to do. And you could imagine introducing a phytomolecule, a molecule from the cannabis plant, and that activates many of these pathways. That could open us up to a lot of different effects, and it could be a bit of a muddied picture. Now, when we look at synthetic cannabinoids, we've taken THC and sort of its structure and manipulated it to get these very potent drugs that fully activate the CB1 receptor instead of partially activate them like THC. And what we find is there is a much higher propensity of heart attack and cerebrovascular events. And the reason why is still being figured out, but it's actually, at least based on this study from 2020 by Sarah Lenapool, she actually found that may have to do with something known as GPR activity. So this is another branch of what the endocannabinoids and phytocannabinoids may be doing in the body. But synthetic cannabinoids have definitively been associated with cardiovascular events. And the question becomes why would that happen if THC appears to be so safe? And once again, it gets down to unique pharmacology. Kind of driving home that same point, these ion channels, there's voltage gated ones, there's ligand gated ion channels, G proteins that we're not even sure what they do, like GPR55 doesn't yet have a home. This could all be contributing to the way that THC impacts the heart, opening us up to benefits as well as risks, things that we're still trying to piece the puzzle together. Looking sort of less at the pump, but rather the piping in our body, we have the role of the endocannabinoid system established within the vasculature as well. It's in the vast majority, most of the layers within the vasculature as well, which suggests broad and dynamic roles of the ECS and of phytocannabinoids like THC in the endocannabinoid system. So in vasculature in particular, the ECS, CB1 and CB2 appear to play opposing roles. One causes vasoconstriction, one causing vasodilation. Essentially, there's a balance built into the ECS that helps it keep itself in balance as well. The ECS is involved in plaque formation. There have been studies looking at this process of building up essentially blockages in our vasculature, which can lead to heart attack or to stroke. We know that there's an inflammatory component to this, and when they've looked at plaques, they've found that there is a very active role of the endocannabinoid system in the formation and growth of those plaques. And so we know the ECS is involved in atherosclerosis as well. So it's something to keep in mind. Now, we kind of mentioned this in the last slide. THC in particular, kind of focusing on marijuana, can acutely cause hypotension. There's also this effect where we can get rapid heart rate, but also rarely low heart rate. It's highly dependent on a lot of factors, including your hydration, your tolerance, the dose consumed, as well as even your endogenous stores of catecholamines and how your body's fight or flight response is primed. So there is a lot going on here, but safe to say that the endocannabinoid system is tied to our cardiovascular tissues, and therefore we know that consuming THC, CBD, or any of these other bioactive cannabinoids can have an impact for sure. Now, we're not the first person to talk about this. In fact, there's entire review articles dedicated to this topic. The ECS has been implicated in heart attack, and they're still trying to fully understand what the process is, what the mechanisms are. But one thing is pretty well understood and mostly agreed upon, that there is a slight increase for something known as tachyarrhythmia when taking THC and consuming cannabis. And this means that the heart rate speeds up and can actually get what I would say is arrhythmic, so out of its normal rhythm, which can present in a lot of ways, some very minor, some very concerning. But this one, as you can note in the infographic put together here from Waressa in 2022, we can see that consuming THC and activating the CB1 receptor leads to an increase in sympathetic versus parasympathetic. So this means fight or flight outpaces rest and digest. It sends the heart into a rapid beat, and those rapid beats increase our likelihood of going into a rapid irregular beat. It's a pretty well established phenomenon. It is not common, however, it is known. Now, there are many other concerns on how smoking THC could lead to myocardial infarction, MI. One of those things is the smoking itself. Even though we know that cannabinoids, THC, do not carry the same cancer risks to the lungs as we know that nicotine does. That doesn't mean that the smoke and the things that come with it are not harmful to our lungs and to our heart. So it's currently unclear. We don't know how much cardiotoxicity may be coming from smoking related symptoms. Can you see my cursor there, Jill? Okay, perfect. So these smoking relating problems could be an increase in carbon monoxide carrying, which reduces our ability to deliver oxygen throughout the body, which can contribute to all sorts of problems. One thing would be passing out or fainting. Another may be even potentially something known as an ischemic stroke, which again is not common and not strongly correlated with THC, but there have been reports. There's also this concern that consuming THC may contribute to the formation of plaques. As I mentioned in the previous slides, there is a direct connection between the ECS and the formation of atherosclerosis. And so we're still trying to tease apart that picture. You can see there's little question marks on the graphic kind of showing us that this is sort of still a question mark. Now, the ECS is involved in platelet aggregation as well, although its role is really, I'll call it controversial, misunderstood, still trying to be figured out. But there could be a correlation between the formation of a clot and then where that clot goes, be it to our brain to cause a ischemic stroke or whether to our heart to cause a myocardial infarction. We also know that ion channels, whether they're voltage gated or ligand gated, they are involved in heart rate, heart rhythm, and potentially in mediating some of these inflammatory pathways. And these TRPs are indeed affected by cannabinoids and terpenoids. So there's a high amount of both of those things in concentrates. So consuming concentrates regularly, what does this do to the cardiac tissue is still a question. Inhibiting those ion channels, modifying them, what does that potentially do to the heart? We do have this coronary constriction. That would be the concern that we're having sort of inflammation and less blood flow back to the heart. And it is certainly in question as well. Again, the ECS is there to maintain balance. When we introduce THC in a chronic nature every day, it is possible and even reasonable to believe that we could be setting this balance off and increasing our propensity for side effects, significant or insignificant. So kind of that was heart attack. Now talking a bit about stroke. There is a direct correlation again between strokes, what's happening in the brain after a stroke, and the endocannabinoid system, but it's complicated and it's not as simply said as, oh, the ECS protects us from strokes. So when we have a stroke, whether it's related to a head injury or whether it's related to a bleed in our brain, or an anoxic injury from a ischemic stroke, the body actually has this sort of ramping up effect where it produces even more endocannabinoids, which lead to an increase in something known as AA, arachidonic acid, and the eventual effect is a pro-inflammatory effect in the brain upon traumatic brain injury, which again includes stroke. So it is confusing to think that we could have a pro-inflammatory effect from the activation and production of cannabinoids. But these cannabinoids that are produced and released upon injury, while probably immediately aimed at having an anti-inflammatory effect, can actually contribute to a pro-inflammatory effect. Moreover, what's really interesting is when injured, we've looked at brain tissues in rodents, not humans. After a brain injury, they looked and they saw an upregulation in CB2 receptors. So the body turns up its production of this immunomodulatory cannabinoid receptor. So the CB2 receptor likely combats inflammation. So the body's cranking up all of these endocannabinoids. It's cranking up its ability to respond to those endocannabinoids. But in the end, the inflammatory response, at least when occurring naturally without the introduction of other substances, ends up being a pro-inflammatory state. So the ECS plays a clear role and a dynamic one in heart attack. We see something quite similar in stroke. It's not a straightforward story. And then we look at inflammation, because we know that inflammation is sort of the start of a lot of these cerebrovascular events and cardiovascular events. And we know that ECS is well appreciated, that it has this inflammatory and anti-inflammatory role. And in general, most of the evidence suggests that omega-6 fatty acids, which, by the way, as we mentioned earlier, is what our endocannabinoids anandamide and 2-AG are sort of derived from. Omega-6 tend to be pro-inflammatory, and omega-3 molecules have a propensity to be anti-inflammatory. So anandamide and 2-AG are made from those omega-6. Remember that THC mimics omega-3, or sorry, the omega-6 anandamide and 2-AG. So it is possible that THC is ended up overall contributing to the inflammatory state of our bodies as opposed to combating it. I whipped this up. So now I guess I want to pause for a second. I was planning on putting an interlude here. What questions do we have? I know that it was a lot of information. What questions do we have so far about THC and its role in the heart? Who wants to chime in? This is supposed to be more interactive. I hate to lecture at all of y'all, so please, someone chime in.
Hi, could I introduce myself? I'm from Australia, Melbourne, Australia, a pharmacist. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Emmanuel.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi, how you going? I need to say I'm very impressed by everything that you were doing. So I do want to become a member of PCCC. The question that I have is prescribing cannabinoids in Australia is very heavily regulated. There's a permit process. There needs to be a letter from the general practitioner physician, and it has to be approved before any prescribing goes ahead. The question that I have is that cannabinoid that is devoid of THC or has very little THC, which is produced as a pharmaceutical grade, not synthetic, but extracted from marijuana crops. Does cannabinoid itself, devoid of THC, have any deleterious effect when it comes to people with heart failure and cardiovascular disease?
I think it comes back down to where I sort of started off. One of those considerations is what dose are we talking about and which molecule? So there is some evidence, although we don't discuss it heavily here today. It's been a topic of some of my posts and some of our conversations around CBD's role in protecting against many of these effects, both in the marijuana product that may be present. There's some evidence, albeit contradictory, that CBD could prevent some of the tachycardia, although some studies, in fact, most of them have said that's not the case. Some have suggested that CBD alongside THC may protect from anxiety, which obviously could be related to this sympathetic versus parasympathetic tone, but not all of them. So we continue to try to understand better, but what the vast majority of the literature and evidence suggests is most of the cardiovascular risks are associated with CB1 agonism, although there's some other receptors in there as well. And as far as the cannabinoids present in basically all naturally occurring cannabis, delta-9 THC is that CB1 agonist. The vast majority of the other molecules do not carry that pharmacology, and then therefore would likely not carry the same cerebro and cardiovascular risks. So to answer your question in short, it's unlikely that the other cannabinoids, primarily CBD, CBC, and CBG, carry similar risk profile. It's likely that this is THC. And as we get to synthetics, more potent, more full activators of the CB1 receptor, we see more cardiovascular events, strokes, seizures, etc. And so those are more likely than THC to cause those same side effects. So for the purpose of this talk, yeah, we're focusing on THC. There may be roles both protective and aggravating with other cannabinoids, but not the focus of today.
Gotcha.
And we'll get a chance to talk about all this after as well. So if someone else has another question in that regard, we're just gonna have a group discussion after I'm done yammering at y'all.
That'd be great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Cody, you have a question also in the chat.
I do.
You want me to read it?
Yeah. So,
Sure.
and Angelica asked, could you say that THC is a precursor to omega-6? She said or versus, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Angelica, would you like to explain your question a little bit more? Precursor to omega-6 or versus?
Or vice versa, or is omega-6 a precursor to?
So THC is a plant molecule. It's actually not related to omega-6 fats at all, but it mimics our omega-6 endocannabinoid anandamide. So in fact, it is sort of THC mimics anandamide, and anandamide is derived from omega-6 fatty acids. So that's the connection, but there is no direct connection between THC and the omega fats at all, other than that fatty tail and its configuration in space is mimicking those omega-6 fatty acid amides, so the endocannabinoids.
So let's say if you were to smoke a lot of THC, will your omega-6 go higher, or again, not related to each other?
They're certainly not directly correlated in any way. There has been speculation trying to look at endocannabinoid levels in THC exposure. So far, there does not appear to be a strong connection, even in chronic THC consumers. Your body still has the potential and ability to produce your endocannabinoids like normal. The flip side of that is the availability of the receptors for those endocannabinoids to react with. Those would be, that would be altered. So no direct connection per se between our dietary intake of omega fats and our consumption of THC, except to say that when I get the munchies, I have a tendency to eat more of the omega-6 containing foods than the omega-3.
Okay.
Does that answer your question, Angelica?
Yes, thank
Okay,
you.
perfect. You're welcome.
Awesome.
Cody, quick question, just for me. Is it true that most of the research is based off of inhalation of cannabis?
Absolutely. We'll touch on that a little bit, but the
Got it.
vast majority of these headlines are indeed associated with smoking and inhalation. So let's get back into it a little bit. I kind of reviewed sort of the connection and where these connections and THC exposure might overlap with cardiovascular disease. This was pulled directly from a nice study done in 2024, just published this year, that followed a group of Danish individuals over a 3 or 4 year period. And it tried to look at the risks of starting medical cannabis and what the incidence was of both a heart attack and arrhythmia. So they looked at over 6,000 patients who were given medical cannabis, and they tried to figure out what the risks were for these individuals. And if you look at the absolute risk over here on the left, you can see that they did have twice the incidence of an arrhythmia compared to non-medical cannabis patients. Now, recall back to where I said that THC does cause increase in heart rate. It's not that much of a stretch to think that there could be an increase in the incidence of arrhythmia. Now, one thing that was interesting that Jill, my colleague here, when she was talking to me about, brought this up, is it was actually a association that was found most closely in these first 180 days. And when you extend out your viewpoint, that association does not continue to get stronger. So it seems that perhaps those who are predisposed to get arrhythmias when you introduce medical cannabis, typically inhalation, that we see this increase in arrhythmia, especially in those first 180 days. Now, over here on the right, acute coronary syndrome, which is essentially a heart attack, you can see that there was no association between starting medical cannabis and having a heart attack. So this was a cohort of younger individuals. So it may not be as reflective as it could be in those who have large cardiac risks. But this Danish study did not find heart attacks correlated, but did see that there was an increase in arrhythmias. Let's look at another study that, I guess actually looking back 2 slides, I apologize, I'm going the other direction. Where's my slide? All right, well, this one was supposed to be towards the end. This is myocardial infarction. This was in a review of the mechanisms. We're now going to jump over and look at some of the studies that were cited in the news and dissect them a little bit. Again, I know that not everyone has read these studies, and I did not do a comprehensive review, but I think we need to move past the headlines. I get really frustrated. As you can tell from my talk so far, I'm not here to tell you that this is all a lie. What I'm here to tell you is that we're being polarized and being fed hyperbole in the news, and that we need to take a more tactful, thoughtful approach to understanding it. So looking past the headlines is what I want to do. I want to review the 3 headlines that I opened this talk with. You know, what are we talking about? Well, this cannabis use linked to increased risk of heart attack in young adults. Study. What kind of study? Is it retrospective survey data? The answer is yes. And it is not a of the scientific rigor that if we were talking to a scientist trying to defend the benefits of cannabis, certainly a retrospective survey would not be considered high quality enough data. So why is it to talk about the negatives? So this particular study that Fox News was citing, you can almost always find these studies in the text of the below the headline, although not always. Sometimes you have to do a little bit of digging to actually find the true published work. This data in particular was pooled for young adults 18 to 45 and based on a single point in time, a once yearly survey called the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System, the BRFSS. So at the annual survey, and this one was done of young adults between 2017 and 2018, they ask, in the last 30 days, how many times have you consumed marijuana? And they have to delineate that and be clear about what it is that means. So in this particular study, I thought that I included it, but in this particular study, it was based on 4 times per month, more or less. So if you consumed once weekly, you were considered a frequent user. So that's here in the frequency of use. You were a less frequent user. If you were a more frequent user, you were consuming more than 4 times per month or greater than once per week, which is the vast majority of cannabis consumers. So when they looked at heart attack, they found that heart attack was more frequent among cannabis users. So there was, in their total number of those surveyed, it was something to the effect of 35,000. They found that 61 cannabis users had a heart attack and 240 didn't. There's your 1.3 and your 0.8. That's up there in your increased risk of heart attack history. The adjusted odds ratio, when they compare these 2 numbers, they're like relatively, when they can accounted for cigarette smoking as well as socioeconomic status, they found that cannabis smokers were 2.07 times more likely to have a heart attack during this trial or during this survey. So there was no correlation found for individuals who smoked less than 4 times per month, but those who smoked more were found to have this 2.07. Now, this twice as likely to have a heart attack is definitely a scary number. Or significant number, I should say. Now, there are a lot of things that could be contributing to this number 2.07, but they've tried to take into account all of those factors, and they spit us out with this number, hit us with the headline linked to adults, and there we have it. There you are twice as likely to have a heart attack if you're consuming cannabis more than once weekly. That's what the takeaway from this whole study is. The problem becomes, or is, we don't have the full picture as to, you know, what level of use these individuals have, what type of cannabis products that they're smoking, what their pre-existing conditions may be. And so it's hard to draw very much from this. One thing I like to highlight as well is they did do this survey. They didn't power it, so they didn't pick a certain number of people to get the results that they wanted. But they do have this 95% confidence interval. That's the 95 CI right here that's reported by the authors. I like to highlight that that confidence interval reflects a number that we're confident the number is within. So it is possible that based on the errors or based on the biases in these studies that were done, that it's up to 3.8 times more likely to have a heart attack. But it is equally as possible that there's only a 12% increase in the risk of heart attack in these regular smokers compared. This is something that's highly overlooked by this average number, this number that they come to at the 2.07. But it's really important to look at this interval here and say, okay, what is the real number? It's hard to say which direction it goes, but we know that we're 95% confident the real number is within this 1.12 to 3.82. That's what they found. It's hard to refute when they find evidence like this, but we do know there are a lot of flaws built into something like this, which is survey data, a snapshot in time asking people how much they consume over the last 30 days. It's also hard for them to remember if they have a good memory of their health conditions, although most people remember if they had a heart attack, especially those who are under 45. But this is sort of the translation that I think that we should all be doing when we see these bombastic headlines, is we need to open up the study, try to understand what the implications are, what are the methods, and how could that contribute to the bias that could be there. So this is my dissection of the Fox News article. I then pulled up the Pharmacy Times article, who reported on this 2023, we'll call it a news alert. This one really grinded my gears. Not because the study's wrong and this is all bias science and blah, blah, blah. No, because this wasn't even released to the public yet. We do not know how these researchers did this research. In fact, it was just an announcement that they're going to be doing a paper in November. I think that paper is now done, but they're doing this poster. They didn't post whether it was peer reviewed. They didn't tell us how they really evaluated it outside of this one slide here. So it was a really challenging thing to believe. Now, again, the headline, right from a pharmacy trusted source, says that there's an association. I already like that word better. Rather than cause or found to have, an association between regular cannabis use and heart failure. So this isn't heart attack. This is a failure of the pump to move blood properly, which typically leads to an accumulation of fluid in the body. So this was using the All of Us survey data. So this is an NIH initiative where patients are taking an intake survey and then continuing to have survey data collected over time, in this case, over 4.5 years. So that's good. Longitudinal data following individuals and seeing what happens to them does tend to be better. And they were looking at the total amount of heart failure in these individuals. They found that there was, let's see here, almost 3,000 people developed heart failure over the follow-up period of 4 to 4.5 years. When they divvied those up into cannabis smokers, you can see the frequency of marijuana use, and the dotted line down the middle represents 1.0. So this is, how do I want to explain this? This would be, for non-users, sort of 1 is no risk at all of developing heart failure. You can try to see if this line in the middle, so at the top you've got former users, people who used to consume cannabis, their hazard ratio was 1.02, or essentially the same as those who currently or never smoked cannabis. If you use cannabis less than monthly, once again, you had this hazard ratio of 1.12. You can see the interval next to it goes over 1 That's how we know that it wasn't statistically significant. That's the same thing with the bar. If the bar is crossing our dotted line of 1, we know that there is no effect of less than monthly use on the incidence of heart failure. Keep moving down, we see that monthly users was this much bigger bar. Interestingly, it leaned towards the protective from heart failure, although that was not a statistic finding, so we cannot stand behind it. Weekly use of cannabis was a 1.02 hazard ratio, once again found to be not clinically significant or not statistically significant, excuse me. And so weekly use was not associated with heart failure. But once we got to these daily users, that's when they finally found a statistical association, right? Correlation, not causation, but an association between cannabis smokers and with heart failure. You can see that 1.34, that represents the 34% higher odds of developing heart failure. But I want to note again, that is sort of the average they come to. We are confident that the true risk is somewhere between 1.04, aka a 4% increase, and 1.72, a 72% increase. So that is what the statistical significance of this finding represents. So when you look at the headline, studies show association between regular cannabis use, heart failure, they could be a little clearer, right? They could have said daily cannabis use and heart failure. They didn't have to be as negative sort of as they did. But this is what the statistics that they did found. Now, what was interesting is they looked at daily smokers, cannabis smokers, excuse me, and they looked at whether or not they had an underlying coronary disease, a history of myocardial infarction or whatnot. And guess what? The statistical significance fell away. And they said that, oh, if you've had heart disease before and you're a regular smoker, actually, we don't know if your cannabis use is correlated. So it goes to show you that there's a lot of things that can and cannot be taken into account. And reading the headline is not really the full picture of what the study found. In fact, they found anyone who's using cannabis less than daily did not have an increase in heart failure, which I think is just as interesting. One more example of a study that just came out. So this is from today, which is kind of fun. You'll notice that I didn't quite get as far as I want on the next slide. But this looked at the same survey as the first one that we looked at. So this is a CDC point in time, once a year survey that gets sent out to a lot of people. They looked at 440 surveys over a 440,000 surveys over a 4-year period. And they evaluated the history of cannabis use in the last 30 days. Have you used cannabis? Okay, how much how many times in the last 30 days? When they looked at that information, this is what they saw. Now, it looks a little confusing, but graph A is coronary heart disease. Okay, so like this is atherosclerosis and plaques building up and heart attacks. Not heart attacks. B is the heart attack itself, actually having a myocardial infarction. C represents stroke, and then D represents all of them sort of compiled together. Now, what you'll see is days on the bottom of these graphs were a reflection. So look, any use of marijuana linked to higher heart attack and stroke. Okay, breathe, right? We need to think about how we're saying that. But when you look at the actual data, you can see that the more frequent use, so days at the bottom, if you use 5 days a month, 10 days a month, 15 days a month, the solid dotted line continues to rise upwards. So as they looked at frequent use, they tried to establish whether or not there was an association between how many days a month you used cannabis, marijuana, high THC cannabis, and whether or not you were going to have one of these these adverse effects, coronary heart disease, heart attack, or stroke. And you can see that there was a statistically significant correlation. The solid line is essentially the average. And within these two dotted lines, let's call them these outer beacons, is where we think the true number probably falls. So somewhere in there. So using cannabis every day for the last 30 days increases your risk, your odds ratio compared to a non-consumer right here, about 40% or 1.4 odds ratio. You can see that once again up here in B, which was heart attack, there was a small but serious increase in the potential for a heart attack and stroke. So once again, they found us a correlation. That correlation is indeed playing out mathematically in front of us. We've looked at it. We also know that this is, once again, it's retrospective data. It is far from perfect. People do have something known as a recall bias, but they did try to account for cigarette smoking and tobacco use, which is higher in cannabis smokers. That's what this next graph was meant to represent. This is where I got caught and didn't finish for y'all. But there was an association between the 30-day cardiovascular outcomes and this total overall risk. So you can see that cannabis use was associated with overall the CHD, the heart attack, and the stroke. Interestingly, when they looked at these 440,000 people who were specifically we were looking for cannabis users, we found that former smoking and current smoking was a much stronger correlation with all of these cardiovascular risks across the board. Age was a much bigger determinant whether or not you were going to have a heart attack, stroke, or have the development of coronary heart disease. And even being a man was more correlated with all of these outcomes than cannabis use. So suffice to say that, yes, any marijuana use is associated with that, but they could have also written the headline, marijuana, less strongly linked to heart attack than smoking, current or former. They could say, men at higher risk of heart attack and stroke, study says cannabis doesn't help either. There's a lot of ways you could have framed this where marijuana wasn't the boogeyman at the top. I thought that this was an interesting study, and I wanted to share. It was very timely, quite literally published today, so you can go look that one up and read it yourself and get a feel for it. I hope you feel a little more comfortable navigating these tools. I did jump through them a lot. What I wanted you to take away from this talk was not to have all the answers and to be able to talk to this subject at length. It's going to take a lot of independent study to really master that. But I want everyone to understand that clicks are king. When you write a headline, your goal is to get people talking about it, to get it shared, to get it buzzy. The more bombastic it is, the less likely it is to really be true. So find the study, look at it yourself, and try to understand it. If you don't, you always ask. You can always bring up things, but bring things to the group. Message people that that might be educated in the subject, but definitely don't take the headline for what it's worth. So this is number 2. This is my personal opinion, nothing from PCCC, but problems with cannabis are possible. I love this plant. I think it's amazing. I think it helps millions, if not tens of millions of people every single day. But to pretend that because it's this plant and not a different plant or a different medicine, that it would have no adverse side effects, that it carries no risk, even if we dab it all day long, it seems a little naive to me. That is my opinion. But marijuana is not the boogeyman it's been made out to be, but it's not perfect. Chronic exposure to any medicine has negative effects, I assure you. And it's possible that chronic THC alters this ECS balance, could alter the availability of receptors, and then predispose us to things like cardiovascular events. Correlation is far from causation. These retrospective studies and chart evaluations are the most common methods used when these headlines come out, and they are also riddled with inherent bias. They do not necessarily reflect a sort of a pure study. So remember that these associated, correlated, tied to, these are all words that the media are using to not come out and say marijuana causes heart attacks, because we actually haven't found that. We are moving towards evidence, though, to say that it can cause arrhythmia in certain predisposed individuals or individuals with a history of other problems. If this is just my take, but if a placebo-controlled trials are needed to prove a medicine's worth, right? We're always being told that we don't have enough evidence to support the use of cannabis. Then why should we accept these weak methods to prove the negative side effects of cannabis either? So I challenge those researchers to go out and give me real evidence of this effect, not just data correlations. Also, the human element, just to remind everyone, these are more than just statistics. These individuals have lives, they've got relationships, they've got a relationship with this plant, they've derived some benefit from it usually. So we have to think, what else do they have in their background that could be contributing to this problem? What else is going on in this world, like overconsumption of omega-6, which could then propitiate the potential problems from THC. There's a lot of stuff that we haven't really teased apart. But I just want to keep that in mind, is that childhoods matter. PTSD, whether patients are using something medically, helps us determine whether these are risks that we want to take on from the medicine that we take. There's also an increased risk of side effects from all sorts of medicine, but we accept those risks and we do it in exchange for the benefit. So there's a lot to consider there, but I just wanted to kind of give you my shtick. I hope that everyone feels a little more prepared to open these studies up, to look at them, to understand some of the limitations that might come with them, and is feeling a little more ready to say, okay, sure, maybe there is a risk. Okay, now what? How do we moderate our use? How do we protect people? Because certainly we know that prohibition is not the answer. But I also know that pouting and pounding our fists every time something negative comes up is not going to convince regulators to listen to us. And saying, well, what about pharma every time isn't going to get us where we need to go. So I think being educated, acknowledging risks where they are, and working to mitigate them is the best thing we can do. So thank you. If you like what I had to talk about, we have these conversations regularly, and we're doing all sorts of stuff. So you can join us through the website. It's not free, but it's not expensive. So we hope to see you join, come to our meetings, get involved with me or any of the other groups. We're breaking up into subcommittees and really trying to focus on our tasks of impacting policy, impacting education of pharmacists and beyond. Yeah, so that's me. That's my shtick, and I would love to hear from all y'all.
Cody, you got some questions in the chat. One of the first ones was, I'm not really sure if it's a question or more of a comment, but in the studies that you went over, are the participants reporting their diet, their stress level? Are they controlling the reporting of other variables as well? And it seems like it's 50-50 depending on the case, but I just wanted that was the first question.
Yeah, there are other variables at play that are really hard to capture in a survey. People's lives, what they're consuming, where they purchase those products, even how they're consuming can be a challenge to even ascertain. We do know that there is a lot of nuance involved in what other conditions people have, and the more granular detail we can get, the better. But a lot of the times these surveys are not able to capture that. I'm not sure. I don't see the comment that you mentioned, so I'm trying to read it.
That's okay. That's the next question was, it was from Dr. Jones, and she was questioning if, she said she might have missed it in your comment, but did the last study specify the method of usage of THC, or were they only referring to inhalation, and did they account for the byproducts of combustion?
In the case of the studies coming from the BRFSS, it does not ask about smoked versus edible marijuana, as far as I recall. And so the second study did focus on smoking, and it found a correlation between the smoking of marijuana and heart failure. But if I remember correctly, the BRFSS only asks about marijuana use over the last 30 days, but does not specify smoking versus non-smoking.
Awesome, thank you. And obviously, anybody, if these are your questions, jump in if I didn't ask them properly. The next question we have is there any info on cardiovascular risk associated with any of the minor cannabinoids being concentrated in some marketing products, particular CBN?
Not that I'm aware of. There is evidence in some review articles looking at preclinical work and CBD being protective from a lot of these molecules. Once again, either on its own or in addition alongside THC. I haven't seen anything with CBN, but if we break it down again, sort of most evidence suggests that it's CB1 agonism or activation by THC and synthetic cannabinoids that causes or contributes to these cardiovascular events. Knowing that CBN has a 10-fold or more reduced potency at that receptor, I would think at doses the same as THC, which is pretty rare for people consuming CBN, that we could say that it would be safer relative to THC. But I'm not familiar with any data, both in animals or in people, that has really evaluated that. Again, CBD I've seen a couple papers talking about protective effects. And then again, looking at CBG, probably the next most common cannabinoid coming to market. Its pharmacology is quite different from THC, has minimal effect at CB1 receptors. And so we would once again expect it to not carry the same risk profile.
Awesome. Thanks. Okay. So this is actually a fun question. I actually kind of had the same question when you mentioned it. You mentioned that after smoking, you crave omega-6 type foods. What is the reason, and what do you think the core of this correlation? And I'm going to add to that and ask, give me an example of a couple omega-6 type of foods.
Yeah, I mean, it just so happens that THC induces hunger, and I think it's usually they call it munchies because it's sort of insatiable. You want it now. And if you go to your closet, your pantry, and you open it up, basically any snack food in there is going to be rich in omega-6, not omega-3s, because they're much more shelf stable. I'm not sure that I crave omega type 6 food as much as I just overconsume it, because any of your chips, any of your crackers, any shelf stable food is going to be richer in omega-6 fats than it is in omega-3. In fact, omega-3 is actually relatively hard to find. But anything fried or baked in canola oil, vegetable oil, any of these seed oils as they've been come to known, is quite rich in omega-6. So I'm not sure if it's as much of a direct craving for omega-6 or sheerly the abundance of omega-6 rich foods in the modern Western diet.
Awesome. Okay. And are there any studies showing, this is actually a great question because it's the reverse. Are there any studies showing cardioprotective properties of THC or other cannabinoids?
So again, with CBD, I've seen some evidence. I wish I would have included it in the presentation of cardioprotective effects. Once again, in preclinical, right? So that's not what we're dealing with here. This is real humans that we're looking at. I have not seen any data in humans saying that it prevents any of these, but I've seen a lot of proposed mechanisms and sort of laboratory work saying that. As far as cardioprotective, I have seen some evidence saying that it could be helpful after a head trauma or after a heart attack, potentially, to help reduce and leverage the ECS that we know is activated in these conditions. But again, most of that has not been done in humans as much as it has been in rodents. And it would depend on the dose administered, over how long. It would depend on that person's underlying tolerance and a few more factors. But activating the ECS at the right time, I think it's reasonable to think it could have its benefits. What we're looking at here, and what we see even just so happens to be the one that I'm looking at, is that this cardiovascular risk appears to be correlated with frequency of use and likely sort of that down regulation of the system when it's regularly exposed to THC.
Awesome. Okay, last question in the chat, and then we can open it up to the group if there's anybody that has direct questions. The last question is there any information on the remote past daily inhalation of cannabis association with adverse cardiac events? So they don't currently use it daily, but they did use it daily at one point. And it's a good question. I agree, because it seems like most of the studies are based off of just a snapshot of who's taking it over the last month based on
Yeah,
those
so
specific.
this last study, this one from Pharmacy Times, it was at the end of 2023. It's the poster that's being presented at CHEST, a very prestigious cardiovascular conference. You can see that former users did not have an increased risk of heart failure. Now, this is not heart attack. This is heart failure. But that study in particular, there's a lot of these studies out there. When I was like trying to go through them and pick which ones to do, it was like a little overwhelming, to be honest. So you'd have to go specifically looking, and I challenge you to take the skills you learned here today and try to go look and see if that correlation exists.
Awesome. Well, that's it for the questions on the chat. If anybody else has any other questions, feel free to do the hand raise on your reactions, or just chime in and let us know if you have any other questions.
Yeah, this is open talking time. I think we have a little bit of time still, but I'm going to back out of my share screen here once again. If you're interested in joining, it would be great if you could. If not, that's fine too. Just keep supporting us and sharing our work, and we would really appreciate that. So I'm stopping here, and I will take any questions that you have further. You can talk about unrelated things. We got at least a few minutes. I'm happy to offer your way. Let's call it 7. Well, quarter after. We'll wrap it up.
Okay,
Hey,
I'll start.
I'll go for
Go
it.
ahead.
Your slides were the bomb. I really liked how you designed those, and you did a great job. So
Thanks.
thank you.
Do you have a calendar of the of what you will be talking about in the future, or can we have a wish list?
Well, you've got the floor right now. You might as well just throw it out there. But we have an email where you could also send this to. It's info@PCC, the website.
We do plan, every quarter we will be having another presentation on a different topic. I do know that our upcoming one that will be, I believe, sometime in May is actually, I believe we're going to have a panel discussion from all of the PCCC members, or board members, to discuss what it means for Schedule 3 rescheduling, so that we can really go over, as pharmacists, what Schedule 3 really means and what this could really mean to the cannabis industry. So that will be coming out in May. It will also be free to anybody live, and the recording will be available to all members. And then I think we have another one coming up at the end of there's 2 others coming up, and I just don't remember what they were at this point. I don't know if Jill or at one of the other board members remember, but there were 2 other topics we will be coming in. So again, every quarter we will be having a free webinar that should be around the same time every day, about 5:30 or 6 o'clock Pacific Standard Time.
I don't recall what it is either, Leah, but we are certainly open to suggestions from members or the group. We want to talk about what you want to hear about. So send us an email, or contact one of us or on LinkedIn, or however you want to do it, but we'd love to hear your ideas.
We would. Thanks, Wendy.
Hi, guys. Can I ask another question?
We're all ears.
Okay. From my experience down here in Melbourne, Australia, we're dealing with patients who are moving from opioids onto cannabis for pain relief. And we've got companies like Spectrum Therapeutics who offer a wide range of concentrations of CBD, THC, and in particular, I have 2 patients that are on CBD with 0 THC, and they've been on it now for maybe 2 or 3 years, and their use of opioids has significantly been reduced. Pain has been significantly reduced, or the perception of pain, and also their level of anxiety and depression has been significantly reduced. We have a patient group where they would have mild heart failure and atrial fibrillation, which is very mild and has actually improved. Blood pressure has improved. So I'm certainly very, very new to this, and my knowledge is extremely minimal. So I'm finding this whole discussion extremely valuable. And I'm following Dr. Peterson on LinkedIn. So your posts on LinkedIn are awesome. But will you in the future have presentation on this area of medicinal cannabinoid use? It's particularly relevant to us here in Australia. I know I've been to America many times. I love New York. Haven't been to California yet. I'd love to visit. I've got a few relatives over there, musicians, by the way. So what's happening over there with medicinal cannabinoid, and do you have any practice experience with patients who do have cardiovascular conditions?
It's a great question, because a lot of people do have cardiovascular conditions, right? I've had experience utilizing cannabinoids in patients who have underlying cardiac conditions. Sometimes it's an arrhythmia, other times it's individuals who have blood pressure. It is highly dependent on the individual and what medicine they're taking, what they're trying to achieve. On a more broad, so I've had some success with individuals who've taken CBD and had a decrease in blood pressure, albeit it was a broad or a full spectrum product, so there was some THC. But other individuals don't have that effect or that benefit. And in medical cannabis as a whole, I would say, what's the word that we would use? Losing ground to adult use cannabis and is falling out of the focal point. It's part of what we're screaming about, is that people are getting left behind, patients who could derive benefit, and they're being told to just pick up a Jeter joint filled with THCA concentrate and just get super stoned. So that's what we're trying to change.
Yeah, and that's why actually our group was formed, specifically because some states do require pharmacists at dispensaries, but California, as soon as they went recreational, they just kind of threw medical out the door, sadly. So I know Cody and I and a couple of the other members do work with patients. And what we've seen is that these patients are going to dispensaries. The dispensaries can't give them proper medical advice, and they just say, use this gummy. And I work with a lot of elderly, and a lot of my elderly patients have been giving too high of a dose. But I've had patients as well who have had cardiac issues, but that's not what they were treating. They were treating something else. And the most I've seen is a very slight reduction in blood pressure. But again, CBD dominant with full spectrum as well. So it did have some THC. But that's why in the US, as the recreational market gets bigger and bigger, the medical market seems to be being left in the dust. And that's why we created this, so that we can help educate patients and providers and practitioners of how to utilize cannabis and the education behind it.
Yeah, I think it's extremely not only important, but it's crucial to the quality of life of patients. I've seen many patients who were virtually zombie-like on opioids because of severe pain, and with the reversal of opioid use to cannabinoid, they're almost, I wouldn't say back to normal, but a significant increase in their cognitive function, and quality of life was significantly improved. Would your organization be interested in setting up a forum on your website where we could post patient case studies that we're dealing with? Like, I'd love to be able to post, patients that we've had dealings with. Would that be something that we could participate in?
I'll answer that.
Sure, go ahead.
Do we already have that? I
We
don't
do
remember.
have a community forum on the website. I can't remember if the setting is for members only. I think maybe so. So maybe that's why you haven't seen it yet. But within the member community, you can post questions and others can answer that. So once you join
Okay,
us,
awesome. Yeah, well, I'm just about to hit the visa button, so I'm joining.
We can't wait, man. We look forward to having you, Emmanuel. Thank you for the kind words.
Thank you very much. Thank
You're
you.
so welcome. All right, any last comments, y'all? We want to be respectful of everybody's time, but if you have an itch and burning desire, speak now or hold your peace. And maybe take some amoxicillin. Okay, y'all. Well, thank you for sitting through my talk. I would love to do another talk. You guys have sort of inspired me. I think that I should flip this around, how to use cannabis for cardiovascular disease. I think it'd be a fun talk. So when it's my turn in 6 months or so, that might be my topic of choice.
Thank you. Nice meeting you all.
You as well. We look forward to engaging more.
All right. See you guys.
thanks
Bye,
for coming, everybody.
Talk. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Jill, did you stop recording? Oh,
I'm
no, we're still